Good evening, Detroit, and welcome to Crime Adjacent Live. As always, profilers, listen closely, because every detail matters for solving this case, and this case needs our help now more than ever, because unfortunately, this case remains unsolved. But, and this is the reason I wanted to talk to you about it tonight, that all might change because of new information brought forward just this year. Here's where it all begins. It's about 3:30 p.m. on Friday, September 4th, 1987, and Brian Miller, age 14, is standing in front of a dresser in an empty bedroom. Brian knows he's not supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to be in that house. He wasn't supposed to be in that room. He certainly wasn't supposed to be standing in front of that dresser, his hands digging into the top drawer, his eyes lighting over all sorts of lacy bits and satin straps. But Brian couldn't help it. At least, that's what he finally admitted, nearly 40 years later, in 2026. It all started with a stolen Playboy magazine he found at a friend's house. Then it escalated to peeping, usually on the mother of his friend, who lived just across the street in the Willow Creek neighborhood of Omaha, Nebraska. And then, finally, on this very afternoon, it turned into actual breaking and entering. This was his first time, he said in his FBI interview in January 2026, when he finally came clean. According to the transcript of this interview, Brian said this, and be warned, there's a lot of timeline information in this episode, but profilers used it to figure out exactly who was where and when. So Brian got home from school that Friday at about 3 p.m., and he began to watch closely. He paid attention, just like he did every day after school. He saw his friend, Dennis Renard, also 14, arrive home. And Brian knew, watching from his window across the street, that it was almost time. And sure enough, at about 3:10 p.m. that Friday, the garage in the house across the street suddenly goes up, and Dennis gets into a minivan driven by his mother, Susan Renard. The car pulls out, waits for little Jessica, a neighbor girl on her bike with red streamers, to pass by. The garage door closes, the minivan groans down the street, and suddenly, the street is quiet again. The coast is clear. This is Brian's chance, the moment he has been waiting for. Now, he doesn't just go immediately across the street. That would be foolish. No, he walks to the end of his street, a cul-de-sac, where he finds an entrance to a trail that runs along the very creek this whole neighborhood is named after, Willow Creek. Brian walks along this trail, finds the fence backing up to his friend Dennis's house, and then Brian deftly hops into the backyard, just like that. In Brian's mind, there's no witnesses. He thought about this. If he simply crossed the street from his house to Dennis's, someone might see him. But this way, jumping the fence from the creek trail, no one would ever know. It was the perfect crime. Brian walks up quickly to the back sliding glass door and starts to perform a trick he had once seen in a movie and practice on his own sliding glass doors back at home. He taps and taps and taps at the glass door near the lock and watches slowly as all these taps knock the latch loose, downward to the unlocked position. It worked. Within seconds, Brian is inside his friend's house, alone, and he knows he has at least an hour and a half until Dennis and his mother arrive home from soccer practice, and probably 2 hours or so before Dennis's dad, Richard Renard, arrives home from his work at the grocery store. So Brian heads upstairs, walks past his friend's room, and makes a beeline for his real target, the parents' bedroom. Specifically, this dresser, and more specifically, all this satin and lace that his hands are now rifling through, caressing, when he hears it. Just outside the window, not the backyard, not that close. He could see down into the backyard, and it was empty. No, this scream was probably just beyond, in the creek area, on the trail. Brian freezes. Was that kids playing? It didn't sound like it. It sounded like something else, like a scream, but also like a muffled cry. It was strange enough to really get his attention. He remembers this is exactly 3:31 p.m. that day because there's a digital alarm clock on the dresser staring at him directly in the face. 3:31 p.m. He's sure of it. He told the FBI he'll never forget those glaring red numbers as he's standing there, frozen. And then he hears it again. Another scream, a shout maybe, and this is muffled too. No, don't, help. He told the FBI he's positive that's what this person screamed. No, don't, help. And that was it. It was like they were cut off. Brian freaked out. This didn't sound like kids. It sounded bad. He could feel it. So Brian pocketed a pair of red silk panties. He was there, he said. Why not? And raced down to the rear door. He raced to the backyard, peeked his head over the fence, saw that the coast was clear, no more screams or kids or cries for help, whatever it was, and then he quickly jumped the fence and ran along the trail until he made it safely back to his own home. His nerves settled, and although that scream had forced him to abandon his first burglary earlier than he expected, he pulled out the red panties and thought, well, success. He had done it, and no one was the wiser. About an hour later, when the first of all the sirens to come began to cry out, and when the first 2 cop cars flooded into this court, Brian knew he was caught. There was no denying it. Just like that, his fledgling life as a skilled neighborhood sex pest and prowler was over. Brian told the FBI 40 years later that he was too scared to come forward. As a child, he thought they would put him in prison. Then, as an adult, he simply forgot about it or didn't really think it was a big deal. But when he eventually came forward to reveal that he did indeed hear a scream that day, it was the missing piece of an investigation that had flummoxed investigators for decades. But it also, at long last, brought the tiniest bit of closure for a family racked by unknowing since that Friday afternoon in 1987. Okay, profilers, let's get into it because you won't believe what happens next. Live from Detroit, I'm Chase Patrick, and this is Crime Adjacent. It's about 3 p.m. on the afternoon of Friday, September 4th, 1987, and 9-year-old Jessica Murphy does what she does every day after school. She gets out of her mom's minivan, tosses her trapper-keeper into the house, and grabs her most prized possession in all the world, a 1980 Huffy BMX bike, Space Invaders edition, only with a bright, sparkly banana seat and red streamers whipping off the hand grips. It used to be her brother's bike, but Cal, got older and moved on to a 10-speed Schwinn, and so with a little modification, like the red streamers, this bike was now Jessica's baby. Jessica lived on Cedar Court, a quiet cul-de-sac with only 8 houses in the Willow Creek neighborhood of Omaha, Nebraska, and so long as she stays in Cedar Court, her parents let her whiz around as much as she likes. It's a pretty typical routine afternoon for Jessica, a 3rd grader. Go up and down the curbs, try to pop wheelies like Cal, pretend to fire lasers at the Space Invaders with her super cool bike. She rode and rode all around the court, having a great time after school. She waved to a neighbor, Dennis Renard, as his mom carted him off to soccer practice as usual. She spotted another neighbor, Brian, leave the court at the very tip where there was this access trail that runs along Willow Creek behind all these houses, a creek that basically runs for miles and connects multiple neighborhoods all around suburban Omaha. Brian is 14 and older than Jessica and allowed to go back and use this trail by himself. But Jessica, being just 9 and in 3rd grade, needs either a friend or a parent or her brother, or at the very least permission and a good reason to use this trail. Those were the family rules. It's not unsafe. This is generally a safe neighborhood. Everyone agrees. But there's moving water, and who knows who is out there on the trail. Older teens sometimes use the creek to smoke or drink or hang out, and so Jessica's parents say she can ride as much as she wants in the court, but she can't go on the trail without a friend. Aha! That's it. A friend. At some point, after seeing her neighbors, Jessica cruises over to the house of her friend, Tabby Miller, yes, Brian Miller's younger sister. Tabby and Jessica are in the same grade at the same school, and they generally play on the court in the afternoon. So Jessica rides over, knocks on the door, and waits, and waits, and waits, and then remembers. Duh, it's Friday. And if it's Friday, Tabby is at ballet practice. Why? Jessica didn't know. She never got the appeal. Video games and BMX bikes and shooting lasers at pretend aliens, that was more her thing. But she liked Tabby, and they were friends, and knew Tabby would be back by 5 or so. She could wait. So Jessica cruises to the end of this cul-de-sac, where she sees her brother, Cal, riding his own bike with his friend, Brock Munoz. This is how we know what Jessica did that day, on the court. Sort of a rough amalgamation of her final moments as seen through passing witnesses. The Renards leaving for soccer at 3:10. Cal and Brock telling Jessica to leave them alone. They were about to ride off to the nearby grocery store on their own bikes, and no, Jessica couldn't come with them. Typical older brother stuff. This was, as far as Cal and Brock could tell, about 10 minutes after Dennis Renard left, so getting closer to 3:20 that afternoon. Jessica shrugs and says fine. Cal and Brock ride off, and this is the last time anyone sees or hears from Jessica Murphy ever again. As far as police and the FBI could piece together, Jessica spends the next few moments cruising the cul-de-sac, pumping the pedals with her pink Vans and shooting aliens and breezing around the street with red streamers flowing off her handlebars, like a perfect Friday afternoon feeling after school, a whole weekend of freedom to look forward to. Profilers, we're really going to dig into the profile and timeline of this case and what they knew in 1987 about that afternoon and what we know now. Because that last sighting of Jessica was at 3:20 p.m. Best guess. And then there was a 40-minute window until Jessica's disappearance was discovered at 4 p.m. What happened in those 40 minutes, we don't know. We do know what happened around 4 p.m., almost precisely, because 4 p.m. is the time Jessica's mother, Margaret, Maggie, heard the ding on her microwave inside their house on Cedar Court. She goes to the oven, removes the Hot Pockets she had heated up as a snack, and notes that it's 4 p.m. exactly. The microwave clock is staring at her. So Maggie puts the dish on the counter, puts a fork there, adds a side of grapes and carrots, those guilt vegetables parents know probably won't be eaten, but at least no one's going to call CPS on you for not trying. And then Maggie opens the front door, peeks out into the court, and calls out, "Jess, snack time." No one's there. Maggie told the FBI this did, indeed, raise a quiet alarm bell deep within. Not blaring, but noticeable, a gathering intuition. This is a small court, just 8 homes, and Maggie knows that Tabby, Jessica's friend, is not home. And Maggie also knows that Cal and Brock would never, ever let Jessica tag along to the store, especially without asking. And Maggie knows Jessica is restricted to the court. She can't go out to Cedar Drive on one end, and she certainly can't go back to the creek and its entrance at the tip of this court, the other end. So Maggie should have been able to open the front door and see Jessica riding her favorite bike up and down the court. But she doesn't. The court is empty, almost eerily quiet. "Jess, snack." Maybe she's down at the end of the court, or in a yard, or who knows, maybe she returned home and Maggie just never noticed. So she walks out to the driveway, in the end of the driveway, looks up and down the court. Nothing. That tiny alarm bell wasn't blaring yet, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it was indeed growing. She didn't think Jessica was inside the house, but who knows? Again, what we know now gives a weight and importance to every moment, every action and movement, but it's key to remember this was just a typical Friday afternoon, one of so many dull, boring quotidian moments. Maggie goes back inside, calls for Jessica, searches her bedroom, the kitchen. Maybe she's coming from the garage instead, but no, the garage door is closed. Deep inside, that alarm bell begins to stretch its arms and awaken, slightly. Maggie thinks maybe Tabby Miller is home. Maybe there was no ballet today, who knows? So Maggie goes outside again, looks up and down the court, no Jessica, and then she crosses the street, knocks on Tabby's door. No answer. She knocks again. No answer. "Jess." Maggie told the FBI she actually pounded on the door at this point. "Jessica." That alarm bell was really waking up now. She told the FBI in a profiler you might remember from previous episodes. "I'm not a worrier, I promise, but something just felt off. I couldn't place it." Maggie goes to the middle of the court, walks all around. It's just all so empty and ordinary, wind catching the leaves of yard trees, thick elms and maples. This is 4:15 by now. It's been at least 15 minutes, and indeed, this is strange. Jessica should be visible, inside, outside. Maggie should be able to see her by now. She knows her friends, her routes, her routines, and this just felt not right. That alarm bell again, beginning to sound now, a buzzer feeling its first real burst of electricity. So standing in the middle of the court, Maggie turns to the entrance, Cedar Drive. No Jessica. There's no way this child would venture out past the court. No way, Maggie thinks. So she spins around, looking into all the yards and up in all the trees, looking on all the sidewalks for that beloved Space Invaders model BMX bike with its streamers and banana seat. Jessica loved that thing, and it would 100% be visible, propped up neatly on the kickstand, not thrown to the ground like other kids did. Nothing. And then she sees it. The entrance to the creek at the tip of this court. She wouldn't, Maggie thinks. There's no way. Jessica knows she's forbidden. But again, who knows? Maybe Tabby came home. Maybe they went together. 4:20 now, that buzzer growing. Maggie walks to the entrance, stops, listens. No kids, no sound at all except for the tumble of water over rocks. Maggie walks down to the entrance, the sound of rushing water, wind in the leaves, birds in the trees. It's really quite pleasant. A dirt track, a creek that rushes in some spots with deep water, about 6 to 8 feet swimming pools, and trickles in others, and sometimes even goes under these long bridges with culverts. Joggers, bikers, nature lovers, kids just out biking and playing. Everyone uses this trail that runs behind scores of neighborhoods. So Maggie's just about to make it to the dirt trail when she stopped dead in her tracks. Because her neighbor, Sally Burton, is out jogging with a Walkman plugged in, and she almost collides directly into Maggie. Maggie breathes a sigh of relief. She's friends with Sally, good friends. Maybe she's seen Jessica. And it turns out she has. Sort of. 4:30 now. That alarm bell quieted a little. But then Sally said no, she didn't actually see Jessica herself, but she saw her bike just off the trail, between the trail and the creek. It was lying on the ground just over there, and Sally points about 50 yards from the entrance to this trail. Maggie perks up. Lying on the ground? Are you sure? Sally nods. Yes, I assume she was just playing over there with Tabby or Cal or something. Why? That alarm bell suddenly comes back, louder now, buzzing. Lying on the ground? There's no way. Maggie, holding in the frantic now, says, "Show me." And together, Sally and Maggie walk down the trail about 50 yards, and Sally's looking around like, where is it? It turns out this bike was 100 yards from the trailhead, not 50. There, Sally points, right there. The bike is on the ground, just as she said, one grip digging into the dirt, with the streamers plowed into the dirt as well. Alarm, alarm, buzz, buzz, buzz. Jessica would never, ever, ever leave her bike in this condition. Never. Maggie reaches down, grabs the handlebars, and hoists the bike upright. And when she does, she sees what's underneath. A singular pink Vans shoe, the kind with those pink and white checkerboard designs. And is that blood on the neck of the bike? That internal buzzing alarm is clouding her vision at this point, resounding deep inside some body hollow that rings like a bell and makes it hard to breathe, to see, to function. Her shoe, her bike, blood. Maggie calls out a guttural, panicked series of cries, "Jessica, Jessica!" But just the creek and the birds and leaves and the wild, panicked roars of her missing daughter catch the air. Sally grabs the bike from Maggie's hands, grabs the shoe, grabs Maggie's arm. "Come on," she says, "we need to call the police." On the one hand, Sally is on it. Like Maggie, she knows right away this is not right. She can see and feel the panic in her friend and knows there's a serious problem. On the other hand, and I hate to even say this, but I think we're all thinking it at this point, the crime scene was definitely spoiled at this point. Sally put her prints on the shoe, on the bike. Any possible blood on the ground or even the exact whereabouts of this scene. Was it the site of a kidnapping, or had someone just dumped the bike here afterward? It was all impossible to tell. Look, this is important. You can't fault these people, not at all. They're panicked and they have no idea this would become a kidnapping that would haunt them for the rest of their lives, especially all these sudden panicked actions they took that afternoon. Maggie told the FBI, "We were just thinking, this is Jessica's bike. She'd want us to care for it. It belonged at home. I don't know what we were thinking." So after finding Jessica's bike, this is 4:45 now. Sally and Maggie rush to the Murphy house, where they are hoping against all hope to find Jessica inside, looking up at them in their panicked faces like, "What's up, Mom? Why all the fuss?" But no, of course not. Cal and Brock, his friend, are there, however, and both Maggie and Sally sort of turn to each other and groan a little, like, how do we explain this? Indeed, Cal sees the bike and the lack of Jessica, and he asks, "Where's Jessica?" He, too, knows it's strange for there to be this beloved bike and no sister. Maggie says, "I don't know," and rushes inside. She calls the police. This 911 call came into the Willow Creek Township Police Department at 4:56 p.m. that afternoon. Maggie says her daughter is missing. There's sort of a lack of urgency at this point in the transcript. A missing kid for an hour, maybe two, maybe less. That happened. No big deal. Suburban 1980s hit different. The dispatcher is telling Maggie to search the house, the neighborhood. She asked if maybe Jessica is just upstairs in her bedroom and no one knows it. There's sort of a warble, and you can kind of hear Sally in the background urging Maggie to, quote, "tell them about the blood." This seems to be the missing thing here, the piece needed to compel urgency, and the dispatcher says, "Okay, we'll send a cop to the scene." The dispatcher asks if Jessica has fallen or is in the creek, and Maggie sort of kicks herself like, no, she didn't actually check the creek. She just saw the bike and returned home. The first cop, Officer Abigail Williams, pulls into Cedar Court about 10 minutes later, 5:06 p.m. Like the dispatcher, she's sort of nonchalant in the beginning. Just a missing kid. She'll turn up. There have quite literally been no kidnappings in this area for, well, ever. But William sees the panic and hears about the bike and the strict parameters of Jessica's afternoon freedom. No Cedar Drive, no creek, and she too begins to hear alarm bells deep inside. This is strange, especially the bike, and the blood, and the missing shoe. Where's the other one? Williams hears all this, and the nonchalance disappears. She calls for backup immediately, asking for a supervisor and other officers to help with the canvass of the neighborhood. This is 5:16 p.m. Within minutes, 2 more cop cars flood into this court, sirens and light bars going full force. Eric Murphy, Jessica and Cal's dad, returns from work at the local bike store, his own business, after Maggie called him home. And soon enough, at around 5:30, a fledgling search party begins. Maggie, Eric, Cal, Sally, and even Brock, their friend, and then Officer Williams and Sergeant Tiffany Johnson and Officer Garrett Albring, they all start going around the court, knocking on doors. No one has seen Jessica. Not a thing. By this time, Tabby and her mother have returned home, and they come outside with Tabby's brother, Brian, and they all join the search as well. No, Tabby has not seen Jessica that afternoon. Tabby was at ballet. And no, Brian had not heard or seen a thing either. Maggie turns to him. "Didn't you hear me knocking and shouting at your door?" Brian shrugs. Yes, he was at home, but no, he didn't see Jessica or hear Maggie knocking. Brian told Maggie and the police, and then later the FBI, that he was just in his bedroom, playing Nintendo, Zelda, his favorite game after it came out just a year earlier. Could he prove it? No. But like everyone else was experiencing, this was just a typical Friday afternoon. He was playing video games while his sister and mother were out. In fact, Brian and Tabby's mom, Elizabeth Miller, had to step in and say, "Back off. Brian was home. He's a good boy. Leave him alone. If he didn't see or hear a thing, that's it." But that's the thing with this case, which did indeed rise to a full-fledged kidnapping that evening. Police had nothing. It was as if Jessica Murphy simply vanished from the neighborhood. Poof, just like that. No one had seen or heard a thing from 3:20 to 4 p.m. What happened in those 40 minutes? The search party keeps searching the neighborhood all night. The creek, the trail, everywhere. They think they find the spot where Sally and Maggie found the bike, about 100 yards from the trailhead, but they find no more blood or signs of anything, really. It's difficult to pinpoint whether this is a site of struggle, a kidnapping point, or whether everything was stirred up by Sally and Maggie. Again, not blaming. What would you do as a parent? Go investigate, right? Not just freeze and say, hold it, this is a potential crime scene, preserve the evidence. No one does that. By 8 p.m. that night, the whole neighborhood is after it. They knock on practically every door in Willow Creek, walk every inch of trail and creek for miles. No one has seen Jessica. Not a trace. It's a sleepless night for the Murphy family. Cal and Eric remain outside basically until dawn, using flashlights to call and search. Same thing the next day, Saturday. It's Sunday. By Monday, flyers are already up all over town, and the principal of Jessica's school has to make an announcement, which she did class by class individually. Something has happened to Jessica. We don't know what, but she won't be returning to school until we find her. But by this first Monday, September 7th, something else happens that is critical, at least for helping to piece together some rough idea of what happened. Chief of Police Alice Hamilton, at the urging of Mayor Gloria Valenti, reach out to the FBI. There's been a kidnapping, a stranger abduction. This is a small town with noise complaints and jaywalking. They'd never had a kidnapping or a murder or anything, and they needed help. Fast. And that help arrived the next day in the form of criminal profiler Sam Press, who was noted for his work on the cases of several missing children all over the country. You might remember him from the story of the cross-country killer. Special Agent Press's initial take on this case in his brief profiling report are astonishing and worth a deep dive into what he saw and why, in the end, this case was so complicated and conflicting and why it became so difficult to solve. This case remains open, and the initial report has never been published in full. But over the years, the police have doled out more and more pieces of it in the hopes of keeping Jessica's name in the press. Back in 1987, here's what Special Agent Press laid out for the police and the family. Here is his initial profiling notes released to the family at the time. This is a low-risk community, meaning quiet, little crime, everyone knows everyone, with a low-risk victim, meaning Jessica, age 9 and in 3rd grade, was not on the fringes of the community and encountering people engaged in illicit economies of survival. She should have been perfectly safe and free, fine here. So Press is thinking immediately, this is not a stranger abduction. Jessica knows her kidnapper, went willingly, happily, perhaps. Based on interviews with every person in that court, whether they were there that day or not, Press says there were no witnesses, no cries for help, no screams, no strange cars, no strange people, no odd sightings. No one saw or heard a thing. So the likelihood of a stranger abduction just snatching a kid off a bike seemed low. So Press's profile says he's pretty sure the abductor lives here, among them all. He thinks the abductor would be an adult male for reasons we'll get into. He thinks the offender would know this area well, the court, the streets, the creek, even all the kids in it. It's possible the offender even lived on the court or nearby or in a house along the creek with access to this trail. He knew exactly when and where he could lure a child off a bike without raising any alarm bells. And he knew, above all, that he could control this particular girl, that she would trust him just enough to go with him. Again, this is based on the fact that Jessica seemingly just vanished. Who else could make that happen other than a familiar figure who knew the area? The profile said Jessica most likely knew this person very well. There are, however, complications. The crime scene offered conflicting evidence. Press was sure to write all this down. Profiling is not magic genie work pointing to individual people. It takes everything from the victim to the neighborhood and the crime scene and even statistics about who lives there and which crimes have been committed there and compiles all this stuff into a best guess theory of who might have done this, what type of person they might be looking for. It narrows things, in other words. So, for instance, Willow Creek is something like 89 to 90% white. And so if it's a local man, it's probably a white man based on these stats, according to Press's profile. A black man or an Asian American man might have stood out just because there weren't that many in 1987 Willow Creek. People would have reported this, for sure. I keep saying a man because that's another complication of this profile. In cases like this, it's almost universally a man, but Press said he's not exactly sure what exactly happened to Jessica. On the one hand, she might have simply walked off with her abductor, leaving her bike behind. But on the other hand, given what he found out about her love for this bike and that spot of blood on the neck of the bike, he wondered if Jessica hadn't instead been blitzed in some way, attacked, and then carried somewhere. So perhaps it was a stranger abduction who seized a perfect opportunity to strike. In fact, Press told Chief Hamilton that his eyes and all the evidence he collected were telling him one thing, that this was abduction by someone Jessica knew. But his gut was telling him something else, something he couldn't quite place, like a tiny alarm bell deep inside. On the one hand, no screams, no witnesses. Jessica just vanished and might have been led into a house on the very court she lived. On the other hand, Press couldn't be sure because of the bike and the blood. If Jessica trusted and knew her abductor, she would have taken her bike with her. The abductor would have let her. Yes, please, bring it. Come along. We'll add new neat things to it in my garage. Trust me. That type of thing. But the abandoned bike, the shoe, the blood, again, all this screams blitz attack, perhaps with a weapon. And was that spot where the bike was found actually the spot of the kidnapping? Did it happen somewhere else, in the other direction perhaps? Jessica raced away. The abductor followed to this point where the offender grabbed Jessica, murdered her, hid her body, and simply rode away on her bike. Transportation became a huge component of this early profile. If Jessica knew her abductor, she simply walked away, probably somewhere close. The trail wasn't super busy that day, but it did have people on it, like joggers and neighbor Sally. If Jessica is out in the open too long, she'd be noticed. There would be witnesses. But if it's a blitz attack, what does the offender do with the body? Hanging around the creek was high risk. Carrying Jessica along the trail was also high risk. Carrying her into a house or a car was doubly high risk. Cal, Brock, Sally, Brian, Maggie, Dennis Renard and his mother, and Tabby Miller and her mother. This isn't a busy place, but there were actually quite a few people moving around from 3:20 to 4 p.m. that day when Maggie first noticed her missing. Someone might have seen a strong man carrying a struggling girl. This case stumped Press. It was all over the place and offered such conflicting evidence. Which is why, day after day, week after week, month after month, and year after year, it slowly, achingly went cold. Chief Hamilton, who retired in 2005, said she had a weird task. She did everything she could to keep Jessica's name in the press, to see if one witness might remember something or come forward. But she ended up getting complaints from some residents as well, saying all this notoriety was given the impression that Willow Creek was unsafe. Indeed, before video surveillance and doorbell cameras became a thing, residents put alarm systems and set up a neighborhood watch. But in the intervening years, nothing else happened. No more kidnappings. No murders. Maggie Murphy died in 2016, never knowing what happened to her daughter. Eric Murphy sold his bike shop in 2017 and moved away from the neighborhood. Cal Murphy, Jessica's brother, said he had to put Eric into a home for elderly people with dementia in 2023, where he died in 2024. Cal said, in the end, Eric called every nurse, doctor, and visitor he encountered Jessica, and he too died without ever knowing what happened to his daughter. For his part, Cal moved away too, sort of. He went to college, got a job downtown in Omaha. He never forgot his sister, but just came to terms with the fact that he too might never know. Like his dad, Cal ended up as a manager of a bike store, and then eventually owner of 5 of these shops all around Omaha and the surrounding suburbs. He had a family, kids, and one of these kids, Melissa Murphy, is actually a listener of this very show. Hi, Melissa. In fact, she actually has her own TikTok site. It's pretty cool. And in January 2026, without telling her dad, she revisited the case of her long-missing 9-year-old aunt. She told about the whip-fast kid with her pink Vans and her Space Invaders bike and her sparkling red banana seat and her red streamers flapping beside her on that calm, peaceful cul-de-sac in Willow Creek back in 1987. And as happens sometimes, this story clicked. It went viral. More than 3 million people shared her story, and somehow, in some way, it made it into the hands of a man named Brian Miller, now a retired lineman in Omaha with a family of his own. I watched that video 4,000 times, at least. And in the end, Brian said, I knew I had to come forward because I just kept thinking, what if? Brian reached out to the police chief, a one-time officer by the name of Abigail Williams, the very first responder to this kidnapping. And Brian tells her, this may be nothing, but he's pretty sure he heard someone screaming that day. He's pretty sure he heard someone, perhaps a child, shout, no, don't, help. But it wasn't coming from the direction of where they found Jessica's bike, 100 yards from the trailhead. No, it was coming from the opposite direction, about 200 yards in the other direction of the trailhead, perhaps in the trail or creek area directly behind the Renard house. And then he says this was at precisely 3:31 p.m. that day. For sure, no doubt, that glaring red alarm clock on the dresser has haunted him through the years, emerging in nightmares in the middle of the night or sudden moments of remembrance. At first, Chief Williams is listening to this and wondering if she's not listening to the confession of a killer. Did Brian Miller kidnap and murder Jessica Murphy? Williams recalled a shy, nervous, nerdy kid who played video games in his room and didn't hear or see anything, let alone his neighbor, Maggie Murphy, pounding on his door that day, shouting. What was he doing that day? Was he really playing video games? And how does he know this? Know the shouts are coming from behind the Renard house, which is across the street from his own. How would he know this? And Brian told her. He never came forward because he was worried. He was worried police would arrest him and send him to prison. He told Williams he had just broken into the Renard house to go snooping in the dresser of his friend's mom and to find all her panties, and yes, to steal them. He said he knows the exact time of these shouts and cries because of the alarm clock. Brian told Williams, at first I was afraid. Then I was ashamed. I knew I should come forward. Then I just forgot about it. Told myself it probably was nothing anyway. Everyone played in that creek. Those shouts could have been anything. And then he sees this viral TikTok video made by Melissa Murphy. And Brian knew he had to do something on the off chance this information could be useful. And it turns out it was. Profilers, I know what you're thinking. I kept thinking about it too. Dogs. Why didn't they send cadaver dogs or search dogs? Something. I don't know. There are no good answers here. They just didn't. But they did in 2026. In February, a search party quietly gathered behind the fence of the former Renard house on Cedar Court, and they let the dogs loose, dogs trained to find the scent of human remains. Instead of heading down the trail, past the trailhead, and toward the spot where they found Jessica's bike back in 1987, the dogs instead made a beeline for the creek. There was a small culvert where the water gathered and surged under a small bridge about the size of a typical house driveway, maybe a tiny bit smaller. And it was here, underneath this bridge, where the dogs reacted. There was something here. Police called in the FBI again, and they closed this whole site down. They set up tents and tape, and they started to dig, forensically. Under years of sediment, debris, mud, muck, and waste, they found something within hours. A shoe. A pink checkerboard van. And then they found bones. An entire skeleton. In fact, a small human female, probably around 9 or 10 as far as they could tell. Brian Miller broke down hearing all this. Perhaps, maybe, if he had left that bedroom and that dresser and those red panties immediately, perhaps if he had rushed out to the fence and peeked over, he might have at very least seen what happened or been able to stop it. Brian Miller declined an interview for this story. Chief Williams declined to say whether he's a suspect in this case or a witness. She said he is cooperating fully with this ongoing investigation, and she declined to say anything more. As for the Murphys, they have, at long last, at least some answers, just not the answers they wanted. The forensics revealed that Jessica Murphy had been attacked suddenly on the trail that day, probably with a large rock. She had been bashed over the head numerous times, enough to fracture her skull in several places on the back side. There are no knife marks in the bone or signs of neck fractures, a sign of strangulation. So they think Jessica was surprised, struck, had enough ability to shout for help, and then was beaten to death with this rock. So why was her shoe and bicycle found so far away, 300 yards in the other direction? Police and the FBI think this was a stranger abduction now, just as Profiler Press's gut was telling him back in 1987. They think the attacker hit her to stun her and then was perhaps wanting to spend more time with her in this quiet area of the creek under the bridge. But Jessica fought. She yelled. She cried for help. And her attacker panicked. What if someone came? What if someone heard her cries and came to her aid? What if someone did something? So the attacker hit her until she died, grabbed her bike, and rushed off as fast as he could. He had to get away before anyone intervened. So why the shoe? Why carry it with him? Williams shrugged. Who knows? This is a cowardly murderer. There was no plan and lots of panic. This points to someone younger who knew the area possibly, knew how to escape, and was not particularly organized. After this brutal, fast attack, the offender then rode the bike away, dumped it near the creek a good distance away from the crime scene, and then simply walked away, rejoining the neighborhood and disappearing into a house or a waiting car. There's no real way to tell. As Chief Williams said, this case is ongoing. While we don't know exactly what happened to Jessica or who murdered her and why, or even why she was riding in the creek that day and whether anyone lured her there, given it was forbidden grounds for her, they do at least have some answers. Williams assured Cal Murphy and his family that the case is more than alive. It's picking up steam. The family and police searched for so long to find this happy child who loved nothing more than her favorite bike and her battles with pretend aliens on perfect weekday afternoons. And now, Williams said, the hunt goes on for the man who murdered her. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, Detroit. Nikki can't be here tonight as she's tracking down a new tip about the killer we all know by name at this point. So you're stuck with me. I'll be in the merch line all night. Please come say hi. And we will see you in Chicago next week with another case you simply will not believe. Until next time, I'm Chase Patrick, and this is Crime Adjacent.